My grandfather used to tell me that the Smoky Mountains had two faces, the one you see in postcards and the one you meet when you're stupid or brave enough to linger after sundown. When I was a kid, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just trying to keep me close, the way lonely old men do when the world starts moving faster than they can keep up. But on the night I returned to his cabin, 3 years after they lowered him into the ground, I realized he'd never told me a single exaggerated thing in his life. The truth hit me before I even unlocked the door. There was something standing on the ridge above the tree line, a tall shape too narrow to be a bear and too still to be a hiker. The dusk had turned the mountains into a silhouette of jagged charcoal lines, and right at the highest point, that shape stood like a piece of night that hadn't decided whether to move or watch. I blinked twice, trying to adjust my eyes to the dying light, and the figure simply wasn't there anymore. No shuffle, no footstep, no sound of brush. Just gone. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone up here. It was also the moment I remembered the very first rule my grandfather ever taught me. Never trust what looks like a man once the sun slips behind the ridges. I tried to shake the feeling off as I opened the cabin door. Dust rose like breath from the floorboards, and the smell of cedar punched through the stale air. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The stone fireplace, the handmade shelves stacked with jars of dried herbs, the big leather chair where he used to read until he fell asleep. For a moment, it felt like I'd stepped backward in time, like I was 12 again, standing in the doorway while he checked the window latches with the same methodical precision he applied to everything in life. But the illusion broke when I saw something sitting on the kitchen table, a piece of folded paper with my name written on the front. Evan. The handwriting stopped me cold. Clean strokes, sharp angles, the same slight downward slant my grandfather's pen always had. I hadn't seen his handwriting since we'd emptied his house after the funeral. My legs turned hollow beneath me as I reached for the note. For a second, I wondered if maybe I hadn't locked the cabin as tightly as I thought when I came up here last year to grab old gear. Maybe I left something behind. Maybe this was nothing. But the paper was new, crisp, untouched by dust. And the ink was still dark, like it had been written within the last 24 hours. I unfolded it with a heaviness in my chest. 4 words sat in the center of the page, spaced deliberately, like they'd been written with someone standing at the window behind them. You came back just in time. My hands began to tremble. I didn't want them to, but they did. The last conversation I ever had with my grandfather was about timing. He'd said, "There's a rhythm in these mountains, Evan. When you break it, everything breaks with you." At the time, I chalked it up to his age, or the medication, or just the way rural solitude turns a man into his own echo chamber. But now, standing alone in this cabin with a note he couldn't possibly have written, I couldn't explain the cold that spread through my spine, and I wasn't given the chance to try. Because that was when the knocking started, not on the door, not on the walls, but on the windows. 1 tap, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps. It moved around the cabin like fingertips sliding along glass, each strike too soft to be threatening but too intentional to ignore. My breath froze halfway up my throat. The tapping continued its slow circuit, left window, right window, the long, narrow one behind the stove, then the one near the bookshelf where he used to sit. I closed my eyes, because I knew exactly what that rhythm meant. My grandfather had warned me about it in the journal he gave me when I was 17, a journal filled with rules that sounded more like riddles than advice, rules I ignored for most of my adult life because I wanted normalcy, not mountain folklore. But there it was. Rule 2. If something taps on the windows, do not acknowledge it. They do not ask twice unless they already know your name. The tapping stopped, not faded, not slowed, just stopped. The silence after was thick enough to hear the soft hum of my own pulse. I cracked my eyes open and scanned the shadows outside the nearest window, but the glass only reflected the inside of the cabin, making me feel trapped inside my own reflection. For the first time since my grandfather died, I understood why he never left this place during the last decade of his life, why he dedicated everything he had, every habit, every secret, every warning, to keeping me away from it. Because something was watching this cabin, and it had been watching it long before I was even born. I forced myself to breathe. The air tasted like dust and pine and the faint metallic tint of old fear, the kind that lingers long after the reason is forgotten. I needed to think, needed to regain some sense of control. So I grabbed the journal from the drawer where he always kept it, a thick, leather-bound book with his initials burned into the front, and flipped to the first page. The rules stared back at me, written in the same sharp handwriting as the note. Never open the door after sundown unless you hear 3 knocks. Never follow lights moving in the trees. Leave a cup of water on the porch at dawn. If you hear your name whispered near running water, run. And above all, never trust what looks like a man in the dusk. I could feel the weight of the woods pressing against the cabin walls. The Smokies have a pulse when night falls. My grandfather used to say that. I never believed him, but standing in the silence after the tapping stopped, I heard it for the first time. A subtle vibration under the floorboards, a faint shifting of branches outside. Not wind, not animals, something else, something that had learned patience. I sat down slowly, the journal open across my lap, the note resting on the table like a living set of eyes. The truth was unavoidable now. I hadn't returned to the mountains because I missed my childhood or because I wanted to reconnect with my past. I'd come because something had called me back. Something that had waited for me to be alone before announcing itself. And whatever it was, it had my grandfather's handwriting. Before I continue, if you're new here and you appreciate true stories that dig into the mysterious, the unexplained, and the deeply personal, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and gives me the motivation to dive deeper into the stories my family left behind. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't that I didn't try, I did. I lay down on the old cot my grandfather built from yellow pine and canvas, pulled the wool blanket up to my chin, and tried to steady my breathing. But the cabin didn't feel like a place where sleep belonged anymore. The air seemed to vibrate as if the timbers themselves remembered something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Around midnight, the wind picked up. It slid along the metal roof like fingertips dragging over tin, slow and searching. I told myself it was just a mountain draft settling for the night, but deep down, I knew the difference. Normal wind doesn't pause in the middle of its movement. It doesn't stop to listen. By 2 a.m, exhaustion settled into my bones, but every time I started to drift, a soft shuffle outside snapped me awake. Sometimes it was a crack of underbrush. Sometimes it was a low murmur, like distant voices carried through fog. Once, I swore I heard footsteps pacing the same slow circle around the cabin. Not fast, not aggressive, just certain deliberate steps, as if whatever was out there was taking careful measure of the place, and of me. But it never came closer. It never tapped again. It was almost worse knowing it was there, but not acting. By dawn, the silence broke all at once. A single bird cried out sharp and loud, as if startled into singing. Sunlight crept across the windows in thin white stripes. The cabin's chill eased, and in that moment, as the world began to move with normal rhythm again, I felt something else, a sense of being released, like whatever watched me through the night had finally stepped away. I rose slowly, my muscles stiff from tension and the lack of rest, and made my way to the front door. I hesitated with my hand on the latch. The early morning air smelled like it always had. Cold earth, wet leaves, the faint sweetness of honeysuckle still clinging to the underbrush. But beneath it pulsed a quiet warning, like a whisper without sound. Still, I opened the door, and immediately froze. A cup of water sat on the porch railing. It hadn't been there yesterday. My grandfather used to place one out every dawn when he lived here, a habit I'd always thought was just superstition or some manner of old-world ritual he carried from his youth. I never understood it, never asked, and now, there it was. Fresh, clear water in a ceramic cup painted with the same Cherokee pattern he once told me was older than the park itself. The strange part wasn't the cup, it was the fact that it was full, to the brim. Even though it had rained during the night, rainwater never filled that cup. He'd told me that when I was maybe 10. "They don't like anything they haven't asked for," he said, wiping the rim with a cloth. "Clean water is a gift, not a trap." His words came back like a cold hand gripping the inside of my chest, because that meant something had accepted the gift. I lifted the cup. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm, it just felt neutral, balanced, as if the temperature didn't belong to the water itself, but to something that had held it before stepping away into the dawn. I set it back down carefully, exactly where I found it. Rule 3. Leave a cup of water on the porch at dawn. I hadn't done that. Someone or something had done it for me. And that wasn't meant to be a courtesy. It was a message. The mountains hadn't just noticed I was back. They'd accepted my presence, or tolerated it, or expected something from me I hadn't yet learned how to give. I tried to push the thought aside and stepped into the yard. The grass was wet with dew, and thin mist still clung to the trees like torn veil fragments. Everything appeared normal at first glance, and for a moment, that calmed me. Then I saw the footprints. At first I thought I was imagining them, dark ovals pressed into the mud near the tree line. Big ones, not human, not animal, too wide for a boot print, too long for a bear, too symmetrical for deer or elk. Whatever made them walked upright and heavy. And the trail they left wasn't random or wandering. It formed a clean arc around the cabin, a wide crescent as if the creature had purposely avoided crossing a specific invisible boundary. A boundary my grandfather had once told me I wouldn't understand until I needed to. This felt like that moment. There were 12 prints in total, each spaced with the exact same distance between them, as if measured by a machine. The first one pointed toward the ridge where I'd seen the shape the night before. The last one ended directly across from the porch step, angled slightly inward, as if whatever made it had stood there for a while, watching the door, watching me. A shiver cut down my spine so sharp it made my hands go numb for a moment. I forced myself to look away, to breathe through the spike of adrenaline and think like my grandfather taught me. "Panic makes noise," he said once, "and noise attracts attention you never wanted to earn." So I steadied myself the way he always did. I walked the perimeter. Every step around the cabin felt like a step back into a childhood memory I'd tried to bury. There were summers when he made me walk behind him as he checked the boundaries, pointing out broken branches, bent grass, disturbed soil. At the time, I thought it was just wilderness education, lessons about reading the land, tracking animals, understanding patterns. But now, seeing the same deliberate arc of prints circling the cabin, I realized he was teaching me something much older. Not how to track animals, but how to recognize intention. Because these prints weren't just made by something passing through. They were made by something that had studied the cabin, something that kept a respectful distance only because of rules older than either my grandfather or me, and something that didn't walk away empty-handed. I circled back to the porch, and that's when I noticed it. A small stone sitting on the top step, dark gray, perfectly round, smooth as river rock, but dry, and carved with a symbol I hadn't seen since I was a kid. 3 lines intersecting a circle, the boundary mark. My grandfather used to draw it on the cabin door frame every spring. A sign of respect, he said. A way of letting the mountains know we were still honoring the old agreements, even if we didn't understand all of them. I stared at the stone, feeling something shift inside me, recognition, dread, responsibility I'd avoided for years. Whatever left the stone wanted me to know the boundary had been checked and approved. It should have comforted me. It didn't. It just meant I'd been acknowledged, seen, not as a visitor, but as a participant. I picked up the stone, weighing its smoothness in my palm. It was lighter than I expected, like it was hollow inside or filled with something less dense than rock. I held it up to the light and saw faint etchings along the edges, patterns I didn't recognize but instinctively understood weren't random. That was when the wind shifted. Not a normal gust, not a draft, something purposeful. The trees moved in a wave-like pattern. First the pines on the left, then the hemlocks on the right, as if something walked between them too fast for the eye to track, but close enough to disturb each branch in turn. I froze. The forest stilled again, but I wasn't imagining it. Something had passed through the trees, something aware of me, something waiting. I turned back toward the cabin, gripping the stone like it could anchor me to the real world. But when I stepped inside, the journal on the table was open. Not how I left it, not even close. And the page it had opened to wasn't one I'd ever seen before. A new rule had been written there, in fresh ink. Do not leave the mountains until you understand why they let you return. My breath stopped in my throat, because that meant something else. Someone or something expected me to stay, and it wasn't giving me a choice. The world felt smaller inside that cabin now, not cramped, compressed. Like the walls had leaned in a fraction, carrying the weight of everything I hadn't understood about the place until this moment. The journal lay open on the table, its spine cracked wider than I'd ever dared bend it when my grandfather was alive. Fresh ink glistened faintly on the page, as if the words had been written seconds before I stepped inside. Do not leave the mountains until you understand why they let you return. I stared at the sentence so long, my vision blurred around the edges. The first wave of thoughts pounding in my skull wasn't fear. It was disbelief, the kind that hits you when reality feels like it's trying on someone else's clothes. None of this should have been possible. Not the note on the table. Not the cup of water filled by something unseen. Not the prints circling the cabin. And definitely not the journal writing itself. But then again, impossibility didn't mean much in the Smokies, not to the people who'd lived here long enough to see what the woods held on to during the night. My hands felt heavy as I closed the journal. The moment I did, a sound rose outside, high and thin, not quite a whistle and not quite a wind. It threaded between the trees like something searching for its own echo. I felt it slide through the gaps in the cabin walls, not as air, but as pressure, a presence, watching, measuring. I didn't dare move for several heartbeats. When the sound faded, the cabin returned to its quiet stillness, but I knew better than to think the mountains had forgotten me. Something had shifted the moment I read that sentence. Something in the woods, that thing that followed a rhythm older than any map. Older than the park, older than my family's presence here, had decided I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I needed answers, or at least a direction. Something to make sense of the chaos stitching itself around me. So I forced myself to look around the room, searching for anything I might have missed. The cabin wasn't big. One room, a small stove, an old iron sink that groaned when you touched it, and shelves filled with books my grandfather swore were useful. Some were survival guides, some were Appalachian folklore collections, and some had no titles at all, just cracked leather covers and yellowed pages filled with diagrams and markings. But it was the photograph on the wall above the fireplace that caught my eye. A black and white picture of my grandfather standing next to another man. I'd seen it my entire childhood, but never paid attention to the details. Now, something about it felt important. My grandfather looked younger, mid-40s maybe, lean, smiling, his hand resting on a walking stick. The man beside him was taller, dressed in what looked like an old ranger uniform, but the kind no modern ranger would ever wear. Not khaki, dark, almost charcoal-colored. I stepped closer, squinting at the stranger's face. His features were sharp, dignified, ageless in a strange way, and though his expression was calm, there was something unsettling about him. Something in his eyes. They were too clear, too knowing, like he wasn't looking at the camera, like he was looking at me. I felt a cold pinch at the back of my neck, and for a moment I could almost smell pine needles and something metallic, like old coins or colder air pushing through stone. I reached for the frame, intending to take it down, examine it, understand why the image felt wrong. But right before my fingers touched the glass, a knock sounded at the door. Not the frantic tapping from last night. Not the patterned rhythm of 3 knocks the rules warned me about. This was a single, careful knock. 1 tap. And then silence so complete it rang in my ears. My heartbeat picked up instantly. I stepped back from the door, every instinct screaming at me not to look through the window. My grandfather taught me that one early. Never reveal your eyes unless you're sure what's on the other side is human. And right now, nothing felt certain. Another knock, softer this time, almost polite. A voice followed, low, steady, unmistakably male. Evan Mercer. My throat tightened. No one should know I was here. No one knew I'd returned. I hadn't told a soul, not co-workers, not friends, not family. I'd driven through the mountains alone, taken the old side road, locked my car behind a gate no one used anymore. But the voice spoke my name like it had been waiting. "You're awake," it said. Not a question, a certainty. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe quietly through my nose. I didn't respond, couldn't. Anything I said might invite something closer, and the rules were clear about the door. Never open it after sundown unless you hear 3 knocks. This wasn't 3, this was 1. Slow and deliberate, the kind of knock a person makes when they aren't asking for entry, when they're stating they've come for something specific. The voice spoke again, this time with a tone that seemed older than the words it carried. "You're early." I felt a tremor run through my legs. Early for what? The mountains didn't schedule things. They just happened, or they didn't. But the way he said it made it sound predetermined, expected. I risked a step closer, not towards the door, but toward the window behind the fireplace. There was a tiny slit in the curtain there, a barely visible opening my grandfather left intentionally, a witness line, he called it, a place to look without being seen. I pressed my eye to the gap, and every thought in my head froze. A man stood at the door, facing it with perfect posture, his hands resting behind his back. He wore a long dark coat, the same shade and cut as the man in the old photograph. A high collar concealed most of his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat cast a thick shadow over his face. Yet from this angle I could see part of his jawline, sharp, elegant, almost carved. But the detail that shook me wasn't his appearance. It was the fact that he wasn't breathing, not in the way a person breathes. His chest stayed completely still. His shoulders didn't rise with the cold morning air. No condensation drifted from his lips. He stood motionless, like a memory frozen in place. "Your grandfather kept his promises," the man said, "and you came back. That means your part begins now." My part? What part? What arrangement had my grandfather made that would reach across time to find me the moment I returned? "Open the door, Evan," the man said quietly. "We have much to discuss." A chill crawled across my scalp. He didn't knock again, didn't shift his weight, didn't do anything except wait. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct screamed to stay silent, to stay hidden, to hold the rules like rope in a storm. But then something new happened, something that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. He turned his head, not toward the door, toward the window, toward the exact place where I was peering through the curtain. He stared directly at me, like he could see through the glass, through the fabric, through the tiny slit that shouldn't have revealed anything. And when his eyes met mine, he smiled, not kindly, not menacingly, but knowingly, intimately, as if he'd been looking for that moment since before I was born. "You came back," he whispered, "just in time." It was the same phrase on the note, the same handwriting in the journal, the same message repeated by something unseen. My breath left my body in a slow, uncontrollable shake, because for the first time I understood something with absolute clarity. Whatever waited in these mountains didn't want me as a visitor. It wanted me as the next step, and the moment I met his eyes through that slit in the curtain, the mountains decided I had already begun. Dawn in the mountains has a strange way of pretending nothing happened the night before. Light spills over the ridges like a slow apology, warming the trees, softening the shadows, smoothing out every unsettling thought you tried to outrun while the world was dark. By the time the sun was fully above the hollows, the cabin looked ordinary again. Quiet, weathered, a simple relic of my grandfather's life. But the man at my door wasn't ordinary. He hadn't left. When the sunlight hit the porch, his figure dissolved like fog touched by heat. Not all at once, not in any natural way. He thinned at the edges first, his coat fading into transparency, his posture unchanging even as the rest of him drained of color. His face, still angled toward the window where he'd seen me watching, was the last thing to go. Those eyes, too steady, too sharp, too certain, held on for one impossible breath before they blinked out with the morning light. I didn't open the door for 20 minutes, not because I thought he was still there, but because part of me feared the truth. That whatever he was, he could step out of existence like a man taking off a coat. And if he could leave the world that easily, he could come back just as quietly. Eventually, I forced myself to move. The cabin's air felt too thick, like dust and memory and fear had mixed into something. I couldn't breathe anymore. I needed the outside. I needed space, clarity, anything that didn't feel like it was closing in. When I stepped outside, the forest greeted me with the same stillness as the day before. Birds called overhead. A squirrel darted between oak roots. The world moved like the world should. But it didn't soothe the tension sitting in my chest. The footprints from yesterday were still there. Only now there were more of them. A second arc formed outside the first one, wider, larger, deeper, like something heavier had walked the boundary the man left behind. The prints hadn't disturbed each other. They formed two perfect rings around the cabin, like concentric circles drawn by different hands. Something had come after he disappeared. Something bigger, something that walked with purpose. I felt the back of my neck tighten again. The Smokies don't give warnings for free, and the night had brought two. I followed the outer ring of prints, stopping every few feet to examine the soil. My grandfather taught me to read ground disturbance, not just how something moved, but how it behaved. Bears shuffle their weight. Elk dig in with their back legs. Big cats leave uneven angles where their paws land. But these prints, perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced. The depth of each impression matched with unnatural precision, as if the creature weighed exactly the same amount at every step. Whatever walked here didn't shift its weight like an animal. It walked with intention. The prints curved toward the ridge where the figure had stood at dusk. The memory hit me hard. That tall silhouette, that unnatural stillness, the way my eyes blinked and it vanished. Now the same ridge felt colder, not physically, but in the way the mind chills when memory becomes evidence. I followed the prints halfway up the slope before stopping. Something felt different in the air, like the atmosphere changed density. A subtle vibration hummed under the ground, not strong enough to shake anything, but enough to be felt by bones. That was when my boot nudged something half buried in the soil, a wooden stake, old, weathered, carved with a three-line symbol inside a circle, the boundary mark, my grandfather's boundary markers. But this one had been ripped out of the earth, its base splintered like something yanked it free with force rather than hands. The soil around the hole was scattered in tight, precise arcs, as if whatever removed the stake didn't claw or twist it. It lifted it straight up, smooth, controlled, intentional. My pulse quickened. In the Smokies, boundaries weren't just symbolic, they were agreements, lines of respect, old rules. My grandfather didn't explain them fully because he always said, "The mountains don't tell their secrets to people who haven't earned them." But I knew enough to understand this. If the boundary markers were being uprooted, something wanted to redraw the lines. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. A man stood 10 feet away, dressed in an old-style ranger uniform. Dark blue, the kind used in the early 1900s, not worn by any ranger alive. His clothes were immaculate, almost pressed, as if he'd stepped out of a historical photograph rather than the forest. He lifted a hand, not threateningly, just enough to show he wasn't approaching. "Morning," he said. His voice was steady, polite, professional, but there was something behind it, an oldness that didn't match his appearance. "Don't move," I said automatically. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly, not offended, more amused or appreciative. "You sound exactly like your grandfather." My stomach dropped. "You knew him?" "Everyone in these woods knew him," the man replied. His expression softened, but it didn't become warm. People get warm. Entities mimic warmth. He was a reliable man, a careful man, and he kept the line intact for a very long time. A cold breath slid through my ribs. What line? He tilted his head, considering me the way a surveyor might examine a plot of land. Not the time for all the answers, but I can tell you this. Your grandfather took on responsibilities that belonged to this land before they belonged to him. And now, he glanced at the uprooted boundary stake. Someone believes those responsibilities have shifted. A rustle of wind threaded between us, tugging at the edges of his uniform. No leaves moved, no branches swayed. Only the air between us. "Are you the one who knocked on my door this morning?" I asked. His eyes, pale, sharp, too steady, held mine for a long moment. "No." The way he said it chilled me more than if he'd admitted it. He stepped forward once, slow and deliberate. "But I saw him, the one you met, and he isn't known for making polite visits." His voice dropped lower, more serious. "Evan, the mountain is not united, hasn't been for a long time, and your grandfather's absence has accelerated certain ambitions." "What ambitions?" I asked. "To claim you before you understand the rules." My mouth went dry. Claim me for what? He looked at me like I already knew the answer I didn't want to say out loud. To hold the balance. Something in me rebelled at the idea. "I didn't come back here for that." "You didn't have to," he said. "The mountains choose long before we know why." He bent down, lifted the boundary stake with one gloved hand, and studied the broken end. "He tore this out," the ranger said quietly. "He wants you to feel unprotected." My throat tightened. The ranger placed the stake gently back onto the ground. "The one who smiled at you, the one who knew you'd return." My breath caught in my chest. I didn't want the confirmation. I didn't want the certainty settling like a weight on my shoulders. The ranger took a step back. "You're being watched by more than one set of eyes," he said, "and you need to learn the rules your grandfather didn't write down." A cold wind swept down the ridgeline. He straightened his uniform, adjusted his hat, and nodded once toward the cabin. "I'll find you when it's time." Before I could speak, he turned and walked into the trees, not disappearing, not fading, but moving with a precision that made no sound at all. One step, two steps, three, and then the forest simply swallowed him. Not hidden. Gone. I stood alone at the ridge. The boundary stake splintered at my feet, and the weight of a truth my grandfather had carried alone for decades pressed down on me. The Smoky Mountains weren't just watching me. They were waiting. The forest held its breath long after the blue-clad ranger vanished. I didn't move. Not because I was frozen, though fear did its best to anchor my legs, but because it felt like the woods were waiting to see what I'd do next. The Smokies have a presence, a kind of ancient awareness that presses against your skin when you're being evaluated. It's subtle during the day, heavy at night, and unmistakable when something supernatural has just walked past you without disturbing a single leaf. I forced air into my lungs and turned back down the ridge, the slope crunching faintly under my boots. Each step felt heavier, like gravity had increased by degrees since dawn. My grandfather used to say the mountains know when you've heard something you weren't meant to hear, that they weigh you afterward the way a judge weighs intention before sentencing. Now I understood what he meant. Back at the cabin, the air felt different, thicker, muddier, like the world was dense with expectation. I stepped onto the porch and nearly tripped over the stone I'd placed in my pocket earlier. I'd forgotten it was still there, cool and round, the carved lines faint beneath my thumb, the boundary mark. I rolled it between my fingers and held it up to the light. Something about the markings had changed. When I found it on the porch earlier, the grooves were shallow, nearly worn away. Now the lines looked deeper, freshly cut, as if someone took a blade to it while it sat untouched in my pocket. For one impossible second, I wondered if the stone itself was alive. That thought should have made me laugh, or shake my head, or at least pull myself out of the spiraling fear gripping me. But I didn't laugh, not even close, because the mountains had already taught me within 24 hours that the impossible wasn't only possible, it was expected. I set the stone on the railing next to the cup of water that still hadn't evaporated. It looked wrong sitting there, like two offerings left side by side, the kind of pairing that felt ritualistic. Inside, the cabin hummed softly. Not with electricity, the solar panels weren't connected yet, but with a subtle vibrational throb I couldn't explain. At first, I thought it was in my ears until I placed my palm on the wall and felt it beneath my skin, faint, pulsing like the heartbeat of the structure itself. Something had changed the boundary last night. The cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was part of the system my grandfather maintained, and now it was shifting. The journal still lay on the table where I left it. I opened it again to the page that held the new rule. The ink was dry, but the indentation left by the pen was so deep it had carved into the page beneath it. Whoever or whatever wrote that line did it with force. Do not leave the mountains until you understand why they let you return. It wasn't a warning. It was an instruction, the kind that sounded like it came from someone who believed I had no say in the matter. I flipped through the journal, scanning for anything about this line the blue-clad ranger mentioned, or the responsibilities my grandfather supposedly held. Most entries were written in practical language: weather notes, sightings of wildlife, maintenance logs for the cabin, reminders about supplies. But scattered between the mundane were fragments that now felt heavy with hidden meaning. March 7th, boundary held last night. Something tested it, didn't break through, must reinforce with new marker at the western ridge. April 11th, they won't cross the stream when the moon is waxing. That gives me 4 days to reset the line. May 29th, the man in the dark coat came again, polite as always, intention unclear, don't trust his smile. June 3rd, if Evan ever returns, teach him the rest. That last line nearly knocked the air out of my body. Teach him the rest. The rest of what? I flipped more pages, scanning desperately for explanation, pattern, meaning. July 10th, keep water clean. Leave cup at dawn. Never offer it twice if they refuse. August 24th, if the markers ever come up on their own, stay inside. September 15th, they don't knock in daylight unless something has changed. My heart dropped to my stomach. He had knocked at dawn. A thing that doesn't knock in daylight unless something has changed. Everything I'd experienced in the last 12 hours suddenly aligned in a chilling new pattern. The tapping last night, the water cup filled by unseen hands, the man in the dark coat staring through the window, the boundary marker ripped from the earth. The ranger's warning about factions, the journal writing itself. Something wasn't just changing, it was accelerating. I closed the book gently, as if afraid I might wake something sleeping inside it. The air in the cabin felt thicker, heavier. A faint ache pulsed at the base of my skull, the dull pain that comes when you're standing too close to something low and humming. A generator, a buried line of electricity, or something beneath the floorboards. I needed a distraction, movement, focus. My grandfather had taught me to reset my mind by trusting the land first. He'd say, if the woods confuse you, walk them. Your feet will tell you what your head cannot. So I grabbed my pack, my pocket knife, a flashlight, and stepped out the back door. The forest behind the cabin was thicker, older, untouched by park maintenance crews. Moss covered the rocks like green velvet. The air smelled different, damp, earthy, tinged with the metallic scent of mineral springs. I followed the path my grandfather used to take on morning hikes. It wound between towering hemlocks and thick ferns curving toward a small plateau with a clear overlook of the valley. I expected the forest to feel threatening, but it didn't. If anything, it felt aware, observant. A branch cracked to my left. I turned sharply. Nothing moved, but the silence deepened, settling low like an animal crouching to the ground. I approached cautiously and found something resting on a stump. Small, hand-sized, carved from wood. A figurine, human-shaped but elongated at the limbs, bent slightly forward like it was studying something on the ground. The grain of the wood swirled in strange patterns that made my eyes twitch if I stared too long. It wasn't there before, not in any of my childhood memories, not in any of the many hikes I'd taken with my grandfather. This was new, fresh. The shavings around the stump were still curled, thin and dusted lightly across the roots. Whoever carved it had done it recently, very recently. I reached out but stopped just before my fingers brushed its surface. A voice drifted through the trees. "Don't touch that!" I spun around so hard I nearly slipped on the damp moss. A woman stood 10 paces behind me. Tall, elegant, wearing a long, pale coat that didn't match the terrain or the era. Her hair hung straight down her back, silver blonde, untouched by wind. Her skin had the faintest hint of luminescence, like moonlight lived beneath it. But it was her eyes that made my chest tighten. Gray, still, and ancient in a way that made the blue-clad ranger seem young. She raised one hand, palm out, not threatening, just signaling stillness. "That is not meant for your hands," she said. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but carried a clarity that cut straight through the forest's muffled quiet. "He left it to Mark where he watched you from." My mouth went dry. Her gaze drifted past me toward the ridge. "The one in the dark coat." My skin prickled. "You know him." Her eyes returned to mine. "Everyone here knows him." "What is he?" She stepped closer, not walking, not gliding, but appearing several inches nearer, without disturbing a single leaf beneath her feet. "He is a negotiator," she said, "of a kind. And he has a habit of choosing shadows when light refuses him." The wind shifted between us, cold and sharp. "Why is he watching me?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Part curiosity, part sorrow, part something deeper, older. "Because your grandfather held the balance," she said. "And now the balance wonders if you will do the same." My breath caught. "I didn't come here for that." She nodded once, slow, as if she expected that answer. "None of you ever do." The woods fell utterly silent, and she added softly, "That is why the mountains choose." Her words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They sat between us like a stone dropped into still water, ripples working outward into every part of me. The mountains choose. That was something my grandfather hinted at when I was a kid, but he'd never said it outright. He always phrased it as guidance, not fate, something you prepared for, not something that pressed itself onto your life without permission. But the way this woman said it felt final, absolute. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe. "Who are you?" She blinked slowly, as if deciding how much truth to give me. Then she spoke. "I am called Mara, a watcher of transitions, a keeper of memory. But labels matter less here than intentions." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were unwavering. "Your grandfather understood intention better than most humans who ever walked these ridges." A cold wind moved through the trees, but she didn't react to it, didn't shiver, didn't shift her weight. The world behaved differently around her, as if she existed slightly adjacent to everything else. "What do you mean, transitions?" I asked. Mara gestured subtly toward the figurine on the stump. "That is a marker placed by the one who met you this morning. It means a claim is being considered, a claim that does not belong to him." My mouth dried instantly. "He's trying to claim me." "Not in the way you fear," she said, "but in a way that would change the balance in these mountains forever." A hollow thump echoed faintly through the woods, distant but not far enough. Mara's head snapped toward the sound. Her expression tightened, the first sign of concern I'd seen in her pale features. She took a slow step closer to me. "We have limited time. Listen carefully, Evan Mercer." She spoke with an urgency that curled around the edges of her otherwise soft voice. "The Smokies have factions, each older than the park, older than the cabins, older than every trail carved into these ridges. Some wish to keep the boundaries as they are. Some wish to break them, and some," she paused, "wish to redesign them entirely." My pulse thudded in my ears, like the man in the dark coat. "Yes, him, and others who see opportunity in your return." Her eyes sharpened. "Your grandfather's absence created a vacuum, one that cannot remain empty. So this is about replacing him," I said. She looked at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. "No, it is about deciding what the next arrangement will be, and who will stand at its center." I shook my head. It felt like too much weight for a single person to carry. "I don't want to stand at the center of anything." "That," Mara said gently, "is usually how the right people begin, not with ambition, but with reluctance." The woods darkened briefly as a cloud slid over the sun. The temperature dipped. Even the birds quieted. Mara's gaze flicked to the shifting shadows. "They are watching you," she said, "all of them. The one with the lantern, the one who greets the dawn, the one who speaks from the trees, and the one you saw in the window." My heartbeat stuttered. "You mean last night? The tapping? Yes." She nodded without letting me finish. "None of those visits were chance. The moment you returned, they sought you. Some with curiosity, some with hunger, some with expectation, and some with fear." "Fear?" I echoed. "Why would anything out here fear me?" Mara stepped closer until she was only a few feet away. Her presence felt strangely grounding, like the eye of a storm where forces swirl but do not strike. "Because your grandfather did not merely follow the rules," she said softly. "He shaped them. He brokered the peace that allowed these mountains to breathe without tearing themselves apart. He held influence few humans ever have. And when he died, many assumed the balance would collapse. It did not." Her gray eyes held mine. "Because they believed you might return." My chest tightened, a knot forming where air should be. "They have been waiting, Evan, waiting to see what you will allow, what you will refuse, what you will inherit." I let out a shaky breath. "I didn't come here for this. I came because, I don't know, I felt pulled." She nodded once. "And that is exactly why the mountains trust you. Intent without desire for power is the rarest form of leadership. A crack echoed behind us, louder this time, not the snap of a twig. Not an animal, something heavy stepping onto a dry branch. Mara's eyes darkened. "We must move." "What is that?" I whispered. "One of the factions, the one that does not wish you to learn too much, too quickly." She turned toward the stump. "Leave the figurine. It belongs to him." I backed away, pulse spiking. "Who is he?" Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. "A negotiator, yes, but also a hunter of agreements. He wants the boundaries broken, and he believes you are the key." Branches rustled. The air thickened. "Follow me," she said. She led me off the path, deeper into the woods where sunlight barely touched the ground. The forest canopy tightened above us, weaving shadows so dense they looked like walls. But despite the darkness, Mara moved with perfect confidence, not stepping around roots, anticipating them. Not ducking branches, walking where they bent before she arrived. She wasn't navigating the forest, it was adjusting for her. After several minutes, the trees parted into a small clearing. At its center stood a massive boulder, streaked with lines of quartz. Mara placed her hand on its surface. "This is where your grandfather learned the rules," she said, "and this is where you will learn the truth." The rock vibrated softly under her touch. A deep hum radiated outward, faint but unmistakable. The sound was low and resonant, like something alive was stirring beneath stone. I stepped back. "What is that?" "A memory stone," she said. "One of the few that still responds to human lineage. Your grandfather used it to understand what the mountains needed. Now it listens for you." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because you share his name. Because you carry his echo. Because the mountains have long memories, Evan, and long debts." She guided my hand to the stone surface. The moment my skin met the cool quartz, a jolt ran through my arm. Not painful, just sudden, sharp, deep, like electricity wrapped in cold water. The world blurred, then shifted, and then I saw something impossible. My grandfather, 20 years younger than I ever knew him, standing in the same clearing, speaking to someone in the shadows. His posture steady, his voice calm. The mountains listening. Mara's voice drifted beside me, though she wasn't speaking aloud. "This is the first agreement, the one that kept the predators of the dark from crossing into the valley, the one that ensured safety for the humans who walk these trails." The image flickered. A second memory appeared. My grandfather arguing with a figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat, the same coat, the same posture as the man at my door yesterday. Their voices rose but never overlapped, like two storms negotiating paths. A third memory flashed, the blue-clad ranger placing a boundary marker into the soil while my grandfather stood guard. A fourth, the mountains shaking from a force I couldn't see. My grandfather's palm pressed against the same stone I now touched. I gasped and tore my hand away. The memories vanished. The forest returned. The clearing fell silent again. "You understand now," Mara said gently. "None of this began with you, but it continues through you." I staggered backward. "I don't want this. I didn't ask for any of it." "Neither did he," she said. "But he chose to protect what others would have exploited." I pressed a trembling hand against my head. "Why didn't he tell me?" She studied me for a long, quiet moment. "Because the mountains will only reveal their truths to those who return willingly." A branch snapped behind us, close enough that the air shifted. Mara stepped back, gaze sharpening. "They found us," she whispered. "The ones who want you to choose quickly." My breath caught. What do they want from me? She turned to face the shadows gathering between the trees. Influence, she said. Access, power. They want to shape the new balance before you even understand the old one. A low hum rose from the woods, not mechanical, not animal, something older. Mara reached out and placed her hand on my shoulder. Evan, she said softly, you must choose who you trust. Because the boundaries are weakening, and the mountains do not forgive the wrong alliances. The hum grew louder. Something was coming, something that had waited for daylight to hide its intentions. Mara's final words pressed into the air like a warning carved into stone. And tonight, they will make their move. Night in the Smokies doesn't fall like it does anywhere else. It doesn't drift down or slip in slowly. It descends, sudden and decisive, like something lowering a curtain across the ridges. By the time I made it back from the clearing with Mara, the sky was turning the color of old steel. The sun hadn't even fully disappeared, but the woods had already shifted into their nocturnal version of reality, a darker, sharper, more ancient version, and tonight was different. I felt it before I reached the cabin, a tension in the air, a pull at the base of my ribs, a sensation like multiple gazes sliding across my skin. The mountains weren't just aware of me now, they were waiting for me. Mara walked beside me for the first half of the hike back, silent but alert, her eyes sweeping the tree line as though she expected shadows to step out at any moment. For someone whose presence seemed to bend the forest around her, even she looked on edge. It made every hair on my arm lift. When we reached the last bend before the cabin clearing, she stopped. "This is as far as I go," she said. I turned to face her. "Why? You said they were coming tonight." "They are." She nodded toward the clearing ahead. "But your grandfather made an agreement that watchers like me cannot cross your family's threshold unless invited." My breath caught lightly. "Did he invite you?" Her expression softened, strangely human for someone who didn't quite move like a human. "No, and he never should have. My place is at the edges between what was and what will be." "What happens tonight?" I asked, voice low. She held my gaze with those steady gray eyes. "Tonight the factions gather, not as enemies, not as allies, but as claimants." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "Claimants to what?" "To you," she whispered. The forest around us seemed to inhale. I stepped back involuntarily. "I don't belong to anyone." "You don't," Mara agreed, "but they will each try to persuade you otherwise. Some through promises, some through pressure. Some," her voice thinned, "through fear." The clearing ahead dimmed, even though the sky still held a strip of fading light. Mara continued quietly. "Your grandfather knew tonight would come. He hoped it wouldn't be during your lifetime. But the mountains have their own timelines." My pulse echoed in my ears. "And you? Where do you stand in all this?" Her eyes softened, not warm, but mournful. "I stand with the truth. And the truth is that the Smokies need a keeper, someone who can see all sides and belong to none, someone who can maintain balance." "I'm not qualified," I said, shaking my head. "I don't know the rules. I don't understand the history. I barely understand what I've seen today." "Knowledge can be learned," she said. "Intent cannot. And intent is what these mountains respect." A deep tremor rolled beneath our feet, so faint I wasn't sure if it was physical or internal, but it silenced both of us for a breath. Mara stepped back into the shadows. "Go," she said. "They will not wait much longer. And if I don't, then someone else will choose for you. The leaves behind her rustled without wind. The light around her faded as if the forest pulled her away, the same way it had accepted the ranger and the man in the dark coat. Within 3 blinks, Mara was gone. I stood alone, the air cold and still around me, the path stretching forward toward the cabin where I knew unseen presences already gathered. I forced myself to walk. Each step toward the clearing felt heavier than the last, as if I were crossing thresholds I couldn't see, layers of expectation, layers of history, layers of choices made by a man who had understood these mountains too well to ever truly leave them. By the time I stepped into the clearing, the world felt wrong, not hostile, just rearranged. The trees ringed the space in a near-perfect circle, tighter and closer than I remembered, as if they'd leaned in during the afternoon while I was away. The air buzzed faintly, the way power lines hum on humid days. The cabin itself, my grandfather's cabin, seemed rooted deeper into the earth. Its timbers darker, its edges sharper in the dusk light. And on the porch, sitting exactly where he had, the night he watched me from the window, was the golden lantern, unlit, but warm to the touch, radiating a faint charge through the air. I stepped closer. A voice drifted from the tree line to my left. "He waits for nightfall." Another voice answered from the right, low and resonant as if spoken through hollow cedar. The line must be tested. A third voice came from behind me, closer than the others, too close. "He arrives unprepared." My heart punched against my ribs. The voices weren't whispers carried on the wind. They had direction, they had presence. They were arranged in 3 distinct positions around me. Factions. The factions Mara warned me about. I turned slowly, and the first shape stepped out. The lantern carrier. He emerged from between 2 pines like he'd been carved from darkness itself. His posture tall, his coat long, his breath non-existent. The lantern in his left hand flickered to life, in a single spark of cold flame, blue-white, unnatural. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his mouth, curved in a knowing half-smile, was visible enough to knot my stomach. "You came home, Evan," he said softly. "Good." The shadows on the opposite side of the clearing thickened, and the next figure stepped into view. The blue-clad ranger. His uniform looked freshly pressed, untouched by wilderness, his boots polished like he'd never taken a step through mud. His expression was composed, but tension lined his shoulders. "You're early," he said, "but better early than unprepared." Then, from the third side of the circle, the side closest to where the creek ran down the ravine, a figure glided forward. Mara, but not Mara as I had seen her before. Her coat seemed lighter, her presence more defined, as though stepping into this clearing strengthened her in a way the forest alone did not. The 3 formed a perfect triangle around me. Predator, mediator, watcher, 3 roles, 3 intentions, and I was in the center. The ranger spoke first. "Evan Mercer, son of the line, the boundary has weakened. The factions gather because the mountains require a keeper." The lantern carrier lifted his free hand, palm open. A keeper with authority, if chosen wisely. Mara's voice followed, quiet but firm. A keeper who understands balance, not control. The air vibrated with pressure. This wasn't a meeting. This was the beginning of a negotiation. "The mountains are tired," the ranger said. "The old agreements were written in an era when humans respected isolation, but the world has changed. The park grows busier, the boundaries thin. They need reinforcement, the lantern carrier said, and someone must decide which territories belong to whom. No. Mara's gaze sharpened. Someone must prevent those territories from tearing each other apart. They were speaking like I had power, like I had a choice, like I had authority I'd never agreed to hold. I raised my hand slightly, my voice steady but strained. I didn't come here to take my grandfather's place. The lantern carrier smiled. But you came. That's enough. No, the ranger said. He must choose. Mara nodded once. Choice matters. Influence without consent leads only to collapse. The lantern carrier's smile deepened. Consent is a flexible concept. The air hissed through the clearing with sudden tension. Then, without warning, the trees behind me shook, not with wind, with movement, heavy, deliberate, predatory. The ranger tensed. Mara stepped forward. The lantern carrier's lantern dimmed. Something enormous moved between the trees, and I understood not all factions wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to claim before the talking even began. The first sound was a low groan, deep, resonant, and wrong. It vibrated through the soil before it hit the air, the kind of frequency you feel more in your teeth than your ears. Every instinct I had screamed to run, even though I knew running was pointless. The woods aren't a place you can simply escape from when something older decides you shouldn't. The lantern carrier's grip tightened on the handle of his lantern. The blue-white flame inside flared once, bright enough to throw jagged shadows across the clearing. The ranger shifted into a stance I'd seen once before, on a game trail when my grandfather came face to face with an angry bull elk. Feet steady, weight centered, ready for impact. Mara didn't move at all. She simply watched the tree line, her expression so focused. It felt like the trees themselves were leaning closer to hear what she knew. Branches cracked, loud, heavy, purposeful. Something was coming through the forest with the confidence of an animal that feared nothing on its path. I stepped back until my spine brushed the cabin wall. The lantern carrier's voice slipped through the tension like smoke. He's early. The ranger's jaw clenched. No, he's impatient. Mara's voice cut through both of theirs. He knows Evan stands at the center tonight, and he wants the choice made by fear. Fear, that word sank like ice into my spine. Before I could ask who or what they meant, the trees on the western edge of the clearing bent inward as if shoved aside by something massive. A shape lumbered through the underbrush, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something pretending to be one. Then it stepped into the clearing, and every breath in my body stalled. It was tall, 7 feet at least, broad as a doorway, with limbs too long for its torso, and movement that was both fluid and jerky at the same time, like a puppet controlled by too many strings. Its skin, or what resembled skin, was grayish and rough, like bark soaked in midnight. Chunks of moss clung to its shoulders, but not naturally, more like scars grown into the flesh. Its face wasn't human, not even close. 2 deep hollows sat where eyes should have been, each filled with shifting darkness that moved like liquid shadow. Its mouth was a jagged, uneven line carved into its face as if with a blade, and when it breathed, if you could call it breathing, the air around its chest rippled like warped glass. The ranger spoke first, voice steady despite the thing's presence. Hollow 1. The lantern carrier's flame flickered violently, always eager for the first blow. The Hollow One's head snapped toward him with a crack of bone, or wood, I couldn't tell. And when it spoke, the sound wasn't a voice. It was an echo of something deeper, something scraped from the oldest parts of the ground. "The keeper returns," it growled. The air thickened, vibrating with each word. "And the mountain shifts. Choices must be carved." Mara stepped closer to the creature, her presence somehow strong enough to keep it from advancing. "You were not invited to this negotiation." A rumble rolled from its chest. "I do not seek invitation." The hollow one turned its face toward me. Those empty, shifting hollows pinned me in place, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt something more intense than fear. Recognition, as if it had seen me before, as if it had been waiting, not like the ranger, not like Mara, not like the lantern carrier, but like a wolf waiting for a fawn to finally stumble close enough. It took a single step forward and the earth dented beneath its weight. The lantern carrier raised his lantern. "Back!" the hollow one hissed, but it stopped, not out of fear, out of calculation. "The lantern burns blue tonight," it rasped. "The old flame refuses my passage." The ranger stepped between me and the creature. "This land has rules. Even you respect them." The hollow one tilted its head, the motion unnatural, like a joint bending the wrong direction. Rules bend when needed. The lantern carrier's voice hardened. "Not tonight." The creature let out a low groan. "Tonight is why we gather. The keeper must choose. The boundaries crumble. The balance cracks. You stand in his way." Mara stepped forward, her face calm but firm. "He is not choosing tonight." A long silence followed. Then the hollow one released a sound that might have been a laugh, if laughter could rot. "He will choose," it said. "All keepers choose, or the mountain chooses for them." The ranger whispered without turning his head, "Don't speak, don't react." I couldn't have spoken even if I wanted to. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth, my heartbeat a rapid drum. The hollow one inhaled deeply, if inhaling is what you'd call the collapse of its chest, then leaned slightly forward enough that I could smell the scent that clung to it: earth, rot, cold stone, the scent of graves left too long in shade. "You smell of him," it said softly, "of the old keeper, the one who enforced lines I did not draw." I fought the urge to step back. The wall of the cabin felt like it pressed into my spine. The hollow one continued, voice low. "You carry his echo, his hesitation, his fear." Something in me snapped, not courage, just a reflexive tightening in my fists. He noticed. He smiled, if that jagged tear across its face counted as a smile. "Yes," he growled, "there it is, the spark the mountain wants." The lantern carrier stepped forward, positioning himself between us. "Enough!" The hollow one didn't retreat. "You want him to broker peace. She wants him to maintain order. He wants him to preserve balance." Its hollow eyes angled toward me again. "I want him to do what the others fear." "What's that?" the ranger asked, breath steady. The hollow one leaned forward, and for a split second, its face came into the lantern light. Under the hollow eye sockets, under the stone-gray texture, I saw something faint, something horrifying. Veins, veins of black amber, throbbing, alive. "Choose nothing," the hollow one hissed. "Let the balance die." My heart stopped, because the way it said die wasn't metaphor. The lantern carrier's flame surged. Mara lifted her hand. The ranger took a defensive step, and then, without warning, the trees behind the hollow one bent inward as if sucked by invisible force. The creature turned, not quickly, but with the terrible patience of something that has lived too long to rush. A second presence moved in the darkness. No shape, no form, just pressure. Heavy, ancient, watching. The Hollow One snarled low, a territorial growl. The lantern carrier whispered, "Not him, not tonight." But the presence didn't leave. It lingered. The ranger spoke first. "We can't do this here, not with him watching." Mara stepped closer to me, her voice firm. "Evan, listen very carefully. What happens next decides what these mountains become." The Hollow One leaned back toward the shadows. "The Keeper will break before the end." Mara's voice softened. "Do not let him decide your path." The ranger added, "Hold your ground. Even indecision is a choice." The lantern carrier's flame flared once more. Night deepens, the moment approaches. Then, as if bound by an unspoken rule, all three factions stepped back into their corners of the clearing, not retreating, not surrendering, but pausing. And the Hollow One? It vanished into the forest with a sound like collapsing stone. The pressure in the clearing eased, but everything inside me worsened. The factions weren't here tonight to persuade me. They were here to test me. When the Hollow One disappeared, it felt like the temperature in the clearing rose by 10 degrees. The air went from razor-sharp tension to a heavy, humid stillness. Not safe, never safe, but breathable. The kind of calm you get after a storm, only because the sky is gathering itself for the next one. For several long moments, no one spoke. The ranger stood with hands at his sides, not relaxed but at ease the way a soldier settles between battles. Mara remained near me, her presence steady as bedrock. The lantern carrier watched the tree line where the Hollow One vanished, his lantern dim and swaying slightly, like it was affected by a breeze I couldn't feel. Nobody moved toward me, nobody stepped forward to explain. They were giving me space, but it wasn't kindness, it was strategy. They were watching what I would do, how I would stand, how I would breathe after facing something made of old stone and older hunger. The mountains were judging me, and the creatures who lived between their folds weren't far behind. Finally, the ranger stepped forward. "That was your first test." My throat tightened. "I didn't do anything. You didn't run." He nodded once. "That's enough." I let out a shaky laugh. "Believe me, I wanted to." "Wanting isn't doing," he said. Mara tilted her head slightly. "Fear is expected. Fleeing is not." The lantern carrier finally turned toward me. The light in his lantern flickered softly, giving him an almost human glow. The Hollow One dislikes order. He seeks collapse. Wherever structure weakens, he moves to widen cracks. "And he thinks I'm a crack?" I asked. "No," the lantern carrier said. "He thinks you're a door." The silence following that statement hit me like a slap. I swallowed. Why me? Why not someone else? Why not, literally, anyone else? Mara's voice softened. "Your grandfather did not choose to be keeper. The mountains chose him, and they chose you before you were born." "That's not an answer." She stepped closer, her expression gentle but unyielding. "The mountains don't operate through fairness, Evan. They operate through need." The ranger added, "These ridges have a history far older than your family line, but your grandfather made them stable, predictable, peaceful." The lantern carrier's voice was velvet over steel. "Some resent that peace." My breath steadied enough for words. "You mean the Hollow One?" "Him," the ranger said, "and others who prefer chaos." "Others?" I echoed. Mara's gaze drifted toward the dark tree line behind the cabin. "You've met only a handful of beings bound to these mountains. There are many more who do not reveal themselves until balance tips. I rubbed my hands over my face. My skin felt hot. My pulse a relentless rhythm under my ribs. So what happens now? Another test? Another negotiation? Something worse? The lantern carrier's lantern glowed just a little brighter. Tonight is not about outcome. It's about intention. Meaning? Meaning, Mara said, stepping closer, that all three of us and the forces behind us must understand where you stand before we move forward, whether you intend to assume your grandfather's role or refuse it. I shook my head. I don't know enough to choose. You know more than you think, the ranger replied. No, I said firmly. I know pieces, fragments, fear, memories, hints, warnings. That's not enough to decide the fate of an entire mountain ecosystem filled with beings I don't understand. Understanding comes later, the ranger said. Responsibility comes first, Mara added. And power, the lantern carrier murmured, comes only when you stop resisting it. Something cold twisted in my stomach. I don't want power, he smiled faintly, and that's why it wants you. A sharp crack from the forest made all three of them tense instantly. This wasn't like before, not something approaching, not a creature. It sounded like a marker, a boundary stake, snapping in half. The ranger turned his head toward the sound. That's the western boundary. Mara's expression darkened. He's testing limits. The lantern carrier raised his lantern higher. He's forcing the choice. My heart hammered. I'm not ready. Mara stepped in front of me, her voice quiet. Then you must say that. To who? To the mountains. The lantern carrier's flame surged, as if reacting to her words. The ranger nodded. Say it aloud. I stared at them, bewildered. What difference does that make? The mountains are listening, the ranger said. They always listen, Mara added. The lantern carrier's lantern cast a faint circle of blue flame across the clearing. Speak! My mouth was dry. My pulse was loud. Every instinct I had told me I'd be a fool to speak into the air like the mountains were a person, like they understood English, like they wanted answers. But every instinct I had also told me that hesitation was dangerous. I took a breath. I'm not ready, I said into the clearing. My voice cracked. I didn't care. I don't understand enough. I don't know enough. I'm not my grandfather. I can't make decisions this big without... The ground pulsed beneath my feet, not violently, not threateningly, simply acknowledging. The trees rustled though there was no wind. The air warmed. Mara let out a breath she'd been holding. They've accepted your truth. The ranger stepped back, his shoulders loosening. For now. The lantern carrier lowered his lantern. The mountain waits. Relief rushed through me so fast my eyes stung. So I bought myself time. Yes, Mara said, a small amount. How small? I asked. Her answer wasn't comforting. Until the next moonless night, the ranger stepped closer. But do not mistake time for safety. You are in the middle of a contest now. Every faction will position themselves. They will show favor, or pressure, or opportunity. The lantern carrier's smile returned, subtle and unreadable. We will each make our case. A second crack echoed through the woods, another boundary stake snapping. Mara's voice was low. He grows impatient. The ranger straightened. This night is done. The next will not be. The lantern carrier raised his lantern once. Sleep lightly, Evan Mercer. Mara touched my shoulder gently, an anchor in the chaos. What comes next will define you. Then, without ceremony, without farewell, All three vanished into the forest, one in a flicker of blue flame, one in a shift of shadow, one as though erased by the trees themselves. And I was alone again, not just alone in the clearing, alone on the fault line between multiple supernatural forces, all waiting for me to choose a side or fail to. When I stepped back into the cabin, the journal lay open on the table. A new line had been written in fresh ink. Prepare for the next moonless night. They will not approach with words again. A chill ran through me, because the next moonless night was only 3 days away. The cabin had never felt so small. 3 days. 3 days until the next moonless night. 3 days until the factions returned, not with negotiations, not with offers, but with whatever came after diplomacy failed. The journal lay open on the table, the ink still fresh enough that the letters glistened when the lantern light caught them. My grandfather's handwriting, steady, precise, unmistakable, sat like a warning carved in bone. Prepare for the next moonless night. They will not approach with words again. Those words haunted every breath I took. I ran my fingers over the page, half expecting more lines to form beneath it. Nothing did. The journal was silent. The mountains, for the moment, were silent. But the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause before a verdict. I tried to sleep that night. I really did. I lay down in the old handmade bed where I slept as a kid, the quilt heavy across my chest, the familiar scent of cedar rising from the wooden frame. But the cabin creaked with every shift of wind. The trees rubbed against each other in ways that sounded intentional. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow one again, the empty hollows where eyes should have been, the jagged tear of a mouth, the way it leaned forward like it could smell the echo of my grandfather still clinging to my skin. I didn't sleep, not 1 minute. By sunrise, exhaustion clung to me like a fog, but fear had clarity to it. It organized my thoughts in a way panic never could. If I was going to survive 3 days, I needed a plan. My grandfather didn't leave many answers, but he left clues, patterns, rules, and the cabin, for all its age, was built with purpose. So I started where he always started, at the perimeter. The clearing in front of the cabin had always been a comfort to me, a gentle slope leading up to the ridge, sunlight spilling across the grass in the mornings, the soft hum of insects in summer. I used to run through that field as a kid, while my grandfather carved boundary stakes at the edge of the trees. Today, the clearing felt different, wrong, like someone had walked through it repeatedly during the night, or several someones. Grass bent in strange angles, patterns that were too large to be made by wildlife, too curved to be human, too deliberate to be chance. I followed a trail of flattened grass to the western tree line, the direction where the hollow one had snapped the stake the night before. The broken pieces still lay in the mud. One half looked peeled, as if twisted upward with impossible force. The other half was lodged several inches deep into the soil, as though something drove it downward like a spike. I crouched beside it, tracing the jagged wood with my thumb. A faint hum pulsed through it, like a memory vibrating through the broken grain. This stake was a boundary. This stake was a line. And now it was broken. What did that mean? What did it change? Before I could think too deeply, something moved in the trees across from me. Not the heavy movement of the hollow one, something lighter, quicker, watching, but not approaching. I stood slowly, eyes scanning the shadows. "Who's there?" I called into the forest. No answer. but something shifted its weight. Fear crawled at the back of my skull. My grandfather always said, "If something watches without speaking, it hasn't decided what it wants yet." I backed away, one slow step at a time, until my boots hit the grass again. The watcher didn't follow, but it didn't leave either. The weight of its gaze pressed between my shoulder blades the entire walk back to the cabin. Inside, I grabbed the journal and flipped through every page that mentioned the boundaries. Several entries were crossed out. Others were marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Circles with slashes, triangles inside spirals, the same three-line symbol etched onto the boundary stone I found earlier. Then I found it. If the western boundary breaks, reinforce the cabin first. Not the markers, not the clearing, the cabin. Reinforce the cabin, not the land around it. My heart hammered in recognition. My grandfather wasn't leaving riddles. He was leaving instructions for emergencies, ones he hoped I'd never need. I scanned the room, trying to see it through his eyes. What did he reinforce? What did he hide? The cabin had always looked simple, just timber, stone, and hard-earned craftsmanship. But as I pressed my hands along the walls, I discovered something I'd never noticed growing up. Beneath the wooden planks were metal strips, thin, cool, slightly vibrating, a protective lattice, not for physical protection, for something else. When I tapped it with my knuckle, the metal hummed faintly, at the same frequency the mountains used when they pulsed underfoot. This wasn't a cabin, it was a boundary anchor, a beacon, a mediator's refuge, the one place the rules actually mattered. Suddenly I understood why the Hollow One hadn't stepped onto the porch. Why the lantern carrier and the ranger never crossed the threshold without invitation. Why Mara stood just beyond the clearing. Why my grandfather never left this place on moonless nights. The cabin wasn't just shelter, it was neutral ground. A place built not to keep the world out, but to keep the balance in. My grandfather had crafted it using materials I didn't recognize, patterns I didn't understand, and knowledge he'd never passed down. And now those protections were weakening. "Great," I muttered under my breath, "no pressure." But that wasn't the end of it, not even close. As I walked toward the back of the cabin, the floor creaked. Once, sharply, under the far corner. Not the normal settling sound. This one had weight, intent. I pressed my foot on the same spot again. It groaned, a loose board. I crouched and lifted it. Underneath lay a compartment, dustless, hidden, protected. Inside was a wooden box carved with the same markings as the boundary stone. I lifted it out and set it on the table. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The box pulsed beneath my hands, warm in a way wood shouldn't be. Not alive, but charged, like it had been waiting. I hesitated before opening it, because some part of me already knew whatever was inside wasn't meant to comfort me. When I finally lifted the lid, my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a map of the Smoky Mountains, hand-drawn, detailed, covered in markings I'd never seen on any official park map. Pathways that didn't appear on satellite images, clearings that shouldn't exist, places marked with symbols instead of names. A small silver whistle, but not for calling animals. A circle of pale stone. No bigger than a coin, embossed with the three-line symbol, a folded letter on yellowed paper, my name written at the top in my grandfather's handwriting. My chest tightened. I sat down slowly, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. I opened it. My grandfather's voice came alive on the page. "Evan, if you are reading this, the balance has shifted, and the mountains are watching." I closed my eyes. because even without reading further, I knew this wasn't a warning, this was instruction, and whatever came next wasn't going to wait 3 days to begin. My grandfather's handwriting had always been unmistakable. Clean strokes, steady pressure, perfect curves on every capital letter. The kind of penmanship you only see from someone trained before handwriting became something people rushed through. But on this page, his script felt heavier, tighter, like each line cost him something. I forced myself to keep reading. If you are reading this, the balance has shifted, and the mountains are watching. Your arrival was not an accident, it was a response. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. A response? To what? My grandfather always believed the land reacted to the choices people made, but a response that waited years, that waited until I returned. I continued. I did not tell you everything. I wanted to, but the rules were not mine to break. The mountains decide what a keeper knows and when. And then, in smaller script, almost as if he hesitated, "Forgive me." I swallowed hard. Forgive him for what? Below it, the handwriting straightened, as if he'd forced himself to regain control. There are 4 things you must understand if you intend to survive the moonless night. My breath caught. 4 things. 4 rules. Just like when I was a kid. Not the simple rules written in the old leather notebook, the ones about doors, windows, water, and never answering voices at night. These weren't those. These were deeper. These were the foundation beneath everything he'd taught me. I read the first one. 1. The mountains do not want a ruler. They want a witness. I sat back in my chair. This went against everything the factions implied, especially the lantern carrier who spoke like authority was part of the job. But my grandfather was clear. A keeper wasn't a king. A keeper wasn't supposed to command anything. A witness, someone neutral, someone present, someone who didn't choose sides. I knew immediately why the Hollow One wanted me to choose nothing. He wanted collapse. No witness, no order. No record of who crossed what line or what agreements were broken. The ranger wanted a referee. Mara wanted a guardian. The lantern carrier wanted a negotiator. The Hollow One wanted destruction. But the mountains wanted a witness. I turned to the second rule. 2. You cannot refuse the role. You can only refuse how it manifests. My heart tightened painfully. Refuse how it manifests, not the role itself, meaning I couldn't walk away, I couldn't drive home, I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. The mountains wouldn't allow it. But I could influence the terms, shape the boundaries, define the expectations. Part of me felt sick, part of me felt angry, and part of me felt something new, something like resolve. I read on. 3. Power offered is almost always power stolen. If they promise you strength, it is strength taken from someone else. That one hit me like a punch. Mara had warned me the factions wanted influence. The ranger talked about responsibilities. The lantern carrier smiled every time the word power entered the conversation. But here my grandfather was, telling me that any power they gave me was a borrowed weapon, taken from another being, another territory, another balance. No wonder the mountains wanted a witness instead of a ruler. A ruler takes, a witness observes, a witness protects the record, not the outcome. One last rule remained, and this one he had underlined. 4. If the Hollow One approaches with silence, run. If he speaks, listen. If he laughs, hide. My blood went cold. My hands clenched the edges of the letter so tightly I nearly tore it. The Hollow One had spoken last night, deep, broken. Words drawn from old stone and older hunger. If he speaks, listen. I had listened. Then I remembered the noise it made later, the low, rotting rumble that might have been a laugh, a chilling, warped sound that shook my bones. If he laughs, hide. Had that counted? Before panic spiraled, I noticed something on the bottom of the page. A final line. If the hollow one laughs twice, do not remain in the cabin. The cabin will not hold. A second laugh. He'd laughed once. Did that mean he'd return to laugh again? Was he testing the boundaries? Was he waiting? I folded the letter with shaking hands and slipped it into my jacket pocket, the paper familiar and foreign against my chest. I needed air. Outside, the clearing was soaked in midday light. The sky was clear enough to see the distant ridges where the tree line rose in deep layers. The mountains looked peaceful, almost inviting, but everything felt off. The bird song was too quiet, the wind too still, the shadows too sharp. Something was brushing the edges of the clearing, not entering, just circling, the same way the footsteps circled the cabin the night I arrived. A cold knot tightened in my chest as I scanned the tree line. Movement flickered in the distance, not walking, not gliding, but drifting, like fog, moving with intention. I took one careful step toward the ridge. That's when I heard it, my name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken in a tone as casual as if someone were greeting me in a grocery store. Evan! I froze. The voice came from the right, the direction of the stream, the direction I was never supposed to approach when someone else was near running water. I turned slowly. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, not Mara, not the hollow one, not anyone I recognized. Her hair was dark and braided down her back. Her dress was simple, faded blue fabric that looked handmade, old-fashioned. Her skin warm and sun-touched, like she'd lived in these woods for years. But her eyes were wrong, too reflective, too still, like polished river stones. She lifted a hand in greeting. You look just like your grandfather. My stomach clenched, not because she knew him, not because she spoke gently, but because her feet were wet, soaked, dripping onto the moss. My grandfather's voice whispered through my head, never speak to someone whose feet drip where no water should be. I stepped backward instinctively. The woman's expression didn't change, but her voice lowered, becoming smoother, softer. You've found the box. My blood ran cold. No one should know that. She took one delicate step into the clearing. Her wet footprints steamed on the grass. Come with me, Evan, she said. We don't have much time. My throat tightened. Who are you? She smiled, and the water on the grass sizzled. A friend, she said softly, a guide. I shook my head. I already have guides. No, she said, stepping closer. You have factions. I'm the one who can tell you the truth. Her voice was calm, warm, persuasive, too persuasive, exactly like the woman in the creek, exactly like the voice in the rhododendrons. A lure. She moved one step closer, and the sound that followed nearly stopped my heart. A low, reverberating growl, not from the woman, not from the woods, but from directly behind me. Slow, warning, protective. I turned. Sam. The golden retriever stood between me and the woman, fur bristling, teeth bared, eyes locked on her with a fierce intelligence that was nothing like the gentle dog who once visited my grandfather. Sam was defending me. The woman's smile faded. That's not your place, she murmured to him. Sam growled again, louder, teeth flashing. For the first time, the woman took a step back. Her reflective eyes narrowed. Then she whispered, 3 nights. The hollow one isn't your real problem. Before I could speak, she stepped backward into the tree line and vanished like smoke hit by cold wind. Sam stayed rigid for several seconds before his muscles loosened slightly. His fur still bristled. His eyes remained fixed on the exact spot where she'd stood. I knelt beside him, my hand trembling as I touched his back. "Good boy," I whispered, and "Good boy." Sam didn't look at me. He looked at the woods and growled one more time, not at the woman, but at something deeper in the forest, something I couldn't see but that he sensed moving closer. Sam's growl didn't fade, it deepened, a low, resonant warning, the kind that rolls from a dog's chest when it's no longer trying to scare something away, but preparing to fight it. His hackles rose in a stiff ridge along his back. The fur at his neck bristled. His entire posture shifted into one of primal readiness. Weight-centered, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the forest like they could cut through the trees. I'd never seen him like this, not even during the voices at night, not even with the hollow one just yards away. Whatever he sensed now, it terrified him. And if a creature like Sam was afraid, whatever stood out there in the trees was far worse than the dripping-footed woman. I whispered, "Sam, what is it?" He didn't blink, didn't look at me, didn't respond at all except with another low, vibrating growl that made my ribs buzz. Then a sound, a faint, brittle crack of a branch, too soft for something the size of the hollow one, too deliberate for an animal, too slow for a human. It was the kind of crack made when something wanted you to hear it, but only after deciding to let you. My breath caught. Sam stepped closer to me, placing himself between me and the sound, his body angled like a shield. A figure shifted in the foliage, not stepping out, not revealing itself, watching, and then a scent drifted through the clearing, sharp, metallic, earthy, but not rot, not decay, something older. Mineral, stone, like the smell inside deep caverns where sunlight never touches. It hit me hard enough that I stumbled backward, gripping the railing of the cabin's porch. Sam's growl turned into a snarl. "Sam," I whispered again, terrified to raise my voice. "What is that?" He finally flicked his eyes toward me, just for a split second, and there was something human in that look. Not animal instinct, not simple warning, a plea. "Go inside." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed his collar, more for my reassurance than his, and pulled him with me up the porch steps. Sam didn't resist. He backed toward the door without ever taking his eyes off the tree line. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then locked it again, then braced a wooden beam across it. Sam planted himself in the center of the room, facing the door, body rigid, ears pointed forward. The cabin suddenly vibrated around us, just faintly, like something brushed its outer boundary. The protective metal beneath the walls hummed in response, resonating at a frequency I felt in my bones. Whatever was outside wasn't just wandering, it was testing, the same way the hollow one had tested the boundary stake, the same way the entity with the dripping feet had tested my will. A third presence, a third threat, another faction, or something worse. I backed away slowly, every nerve in my body burning with adrenaline. Then, a knock. I froze. Sam barked once, sharp and explosive. The knock came again, not frantic, not aggressive, soft, measured, polite. And it came from the back door. The back door is never used. Not once in my entire childhood did my grandfather ever unlock it. It was blocked by a heavy cabinet, furniture arranged to make it look like nothing was there. But now, knock, 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 3 knocks. My heart stopped. My grandfather's rule slammed into my skull like a hammer. If someone knocks 3 times, open the door, but only if they knock the 4th. I held my breath. Sam stopped barking. He didn't growl, he didn't snarl, he whimpered. A small sound, fear, submission. He backed up slowly until his body pressed against my leg. Sam wasn't afraid of the Hollow One. He wasn't afraid of the Creek Woman. He wasn't afraid of voices in the night. But this broke him. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then a fourth knock. Soft, gentle, final. I felt my throat tighten painfully. My grandfather had always said that the four-knock visitor was dangerous only if ignored. But what if it wasn't the four-knock visitor? What if something mimicked it? The mountains were full of mimicry, sound borrowers, voice walkers, things that learned patterns and repeated them for purposes that were never human. The fourth knock came again, quieter, followed by a voice I knew, a voice I wanted so desperately to believe belonged to who it sounded like. "Evan," my grandfather's voice. My knees nearly buckled. He spoke again, calm as ever, the faint southern rasp I grew up hearing in every bedtime story and every summer lesson. "Open the door, son. There's not much time now." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. It sounded exactly like him. Every syllable, every cadence, every familiar warmth. Sam whimpered louder. The cabin creaked like something pressed against the boundary from outside. "Evan," the voice said again, a little softer. "Let me in. I need to warn you." My breath hitched. My grandfather never raised his voice, never scared me, never sounded like anything but steady reassurance. But Sam wasn't reassured. His entire body shook. He pressed his forehead into my leg like he wanted to push me backward. Then he growled, low, trembling, desperate, not at the door, at me. Because he knew I was weakening. His growl deepened. No, not a growl, a command. Don't. The realization hit like lightning. Sam understood the rules. Sam knew the difference between what was real and what used the real as bait. The voice on the other side grew impatient. "Evan Mercer," it said quietly, no longer gentle. "Open this door." He never used my full name. Not once in his life. I stepped back so hard I hit the table. The journal fell open again, fluttering to a page I hadn't read. A page where his handwriting looked rushed, terrified. "If you ever hear my voice after I'm gone, run." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then a laugh. My blood ran cold. Not booming, not wild, not human. Just a soft, low chuckle. Mocking, patient, hungry. The first laugh. The Hollow One's laugh. Sam barked so loudly it shook the windows. Outside, the footsteps moved away from the door. Slow, heavy, deliberate, heading around the cabin, circling, just like the first night I arrived, but this time, there was no patience, no rhythm, no negotiation. The Hollow One wasn't walking the boundary, he was hunting it. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Sam pressed against me, trembling, but ready. And through the walls of the cabin, through the boundary metal, through the trembling earth itself, I could hear one truth louder than my own heartbeat. The Hollow One would laugh a second time, and when he did, the cabin wouldn't hold. The Hollow One's footsteps circled the cabin with a cadence that grew more deliberate each time it passed. Soft at first, like a creature testing distance, then heavier, slow, intentional. It wasn't walking a boundary anymore. It was marking one, claiming this ground, claiming me. Sam pressed his weight into my legs, tail stiff, ears locked forward, trembling with each step the creature took. He didn't bark again, didn't growl, didn't dare. Some threats demand silence, not noise. Some dangers are too old to challenge openly, even for something like him. The laughter had stopped, but the echo of it clung to the wood of the cabin like a stain. My grandfather's warning pulsed through my skull in an unbroken loop. If he laughs a second time, do not remain in the cabin. The cabin will not hold. The cabin itself seemed to know what was coming. The metal beneath the walls vibrated softly. The floorboards ticked like cooling iron. The windows pulsed as if an unseen hand pressed against the glass. The hollow one wasn't alone. That much I felt in my bones. Something else had joined him. Something the mountains didn't name in any rule. As the footsteps halted directly in front of the door, Sam leaned forward, his fur brushing my jeans, and he looked up at me with a quiet, human intelligence. Move. Not a word, not language, a feeling, a push in my chest, a knowing. Sam wanted us out, but to step outside meant abandoning the last bit of protection I had. Stepping outside meant stepping directly into whatever the Hollow One had brought with him. I crouched beside Sam, burying my fingers into his fur, grounding myself in something warm, something real. The air outside the door dropped 5 degrees in an instant. Frost crept along the bottom edges of the frame. Not winter frost, not weather, the kind that grows in places sunlight has never reached. I whispered, "Sam, what do I do?" He didn't move, but the answer came anyway. Not from him, not from the journal, not from memory, from the mountains. A low hum vibrated through the soil beneath the cabin, through the soles of my boots, up into my bones. A hum of decision, a hum of expectation. The mountains were listening again, waiting for me to choose not whether to be keeper. That had already been decided, waiting for how I would stand. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then knock, but not on the door, on the roof. A slow drag of something heavy across the shingles. A scraping like claws on wood. Then a thud, deep enough to rattle dust from the rafters. I didn't dare breathe. Sam's body tensed so violently his muscles vibrated under my hands. Then came the sound I dreaded most, a soft breath above us, slow, long, shuddering, like a creature inhaling the scent of prey. Sam lunged forward and barked so forcefully the windows shook. He wasn't warning the Hollow One anymore. He was warning me. Move, move now. I grabbed my backpack, already packed with what little I needed, and slung it over my shoulder. The wooden box with the map and stone and whistle went inside. The journal followed. I hesitated for a second, then grabbed the carved boundary stone from the porch railing. The roof creaked deeply again. The Hollow One shifted its weight, and then, with a sound that made my blood run cold, it laughed. A deep, rotted, vibrating laugh that crawled through the wood, through the metal lattice, through every inch of the cabin like the aftershock of an earthquake. The second laugh. Sam shoved his body against me so hard, I stumbled toward the back door. No choice now. The cabin would not hold. I threw the beam aside, unlatched the door, and pulled it open just wide enough for Sam and me to slip through. The woods beyond were pitch black. No moon, no stars, no lantern light. Just the void of the Smokies on a night that didn't want witnesses. Sam darted out first, turning back to make sure I followed. I did. The moment my foot left the cabin porch, the hum in the ground changed. The mountains exhaled, and then the roof behind me caved inward. Not collapsed, not broken, caved, like something dropped from above onto the cabin with impossible force. Wood splintered, metal screamed, dust exploded outward. I covered my head instinctively as debris flew. Sam pressed against my legs to shield me, growling, not at the cabin, but at something inside it now, something that had broken through. I turned just in time to see a dark shape rising inside the ruin of my grandfather's home. The hollow one stepped over the corner beam effortlessly, its elongated limbs bending in unnatural angles. It stood in the wreckage, its head brushing the fractured rafters, its hollow eyes glowing faintly like embers beneath coal. It sniffed the air, then its head snapped toward us. It saw us. No more hiding, no more boundaries, no more negotiations. This was pursuit. Sam barked once, short, urgent, then sprinted toward the tree line. I followed him into the darkness without looking back. Branches lashed my arms. Roots caught my boots. The forest floor felt uneven, unfamiliar, shifting beneath my feet as if the mountain rearranged itself in real time. Behind us, the hollow one moved. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. I heard weight, the sound of the world bending under something too heavy, too ancient to belong on the surface. Each time it stepped, the ground thudded like a distant drum, steady, unhurried, relentless. Sam led us along a narrow deer path that twisted between clusters of rhododendron. Their branches clawed at my jacket, their leaves brushing my cheeks like cold hands. The darkness thickened the farther we ran, as if the absence of moonlight deepened with each step. The hollow one didn't slow, didn't stumble, didn't need light. It followed like it followed scent, like it followed heat, like it followed purpose. We reached a steep drop, the ridge falling away into a slope covered in stones and undergrowth. Sam didn't hesitate. He leaped down, using momentum to slide across the loose rock. I followed, nearly losing my balance twice. Halfway down the slope, something glinted to the left. A flicker of lantern flame. Blue-white, cold, aware. The lantern carrier stood at the bottom of the ridge, lantern held high, illuminating nothing except the air around him. He raised his free hand toward us, not beckoning but guiding. "This way," he called out. His voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Sam veered toward him immediately. I followed. The lantern carrier stepped backward into a narrow passage between two boulders. The flame in his lantern grew brighter, lighting the jagged walls with an unnatural glow. "Hurry," he warned, "while the path remains open." But as Sam reached the entrance to the passage, he stopped abruptly. He growled, and not at the hollow one, at the lantern carrier. The lantern carrier's expression didn't change, but his lantern flickered, and the cold, blue flame brightened in a way that made my stomach twist. Sam barked sharply, planting himself between me and the lantern. For the second time that night, he wasn't just warning me, he was stopping me. I froze. "What's wrong?" I whispered. Sam growled, the kind of growl that said, "This is not shelter, this is not help, this is a trap." The lantern carrier tilted his head, hat shadowing his eyes. "Evan," he said calmly, "come now. There is no time." Behind me, the hollow one's heavy steps thudded closer, but in Sam's rigid stance, I felt a truth. Running toward the lantern was more dangerous than running from the monster behind us. I backed away slowly. The lantern carrier's smile thinned, sharp and cold. "So be it," he whispered. His lantern dimmed. The passage vanished, and Sam nudged me hard. We ran again, toward the deeper woods, toward the darker paths, toward whatever the mountains wanted me to face next. The lantern carrier's disappearance left the forest darker than before, like his extinguished flame had swallowed the last scraps of light rather than simply dimmed. The ridge behind us trembled with each heavy step of the hollow one, shaking loose dirt and pebbles that chased us downhill like tiny echoes of its approach. Sam didn't pause, didn't check behind him, didn't look to me for direction. He ran as if he knew the only path left, not the safest path, not the shortest path, but the one the mountains themselves carved for us. The dark swallowed everything except Sam's golden fur, which flashed faintly each time he broke through a patch of open space. I followed the movement, lungs burning, branches whipping my arms. My legs screamed from the sprinting and stumbling, but panic pushed me forward. The hollow one moved without fatigue, without rapid breath, without frustration, just steady, inevitable pursuit. The kind of pursuit you can't outrun because it isn't chasing your speed. It's chasing your fate. As we raced deeper into the woods, the terrain began to change. The ground softened beneath my boots, the soil turning almost spongy in places. The dense rhododendron thinned into tall hemlocks and spruce, their trunks rising like pillars in some ancient cathedral that hadn't heard human voices in centuries. Sam skidded to a sudden stop. I nearly crashed into him. Ahead of us, the forest opened into a clearing, but not like the one around my cabin. This one was circular, perfect, unnatural in its symmetry. The trees stood uniformly spaced, roots forming twisted shapes like braids. The air within the circle shimmered faintly like heat waves rising off asphalt. Sam growled, stepping back. A boundary, a forbidden one. My grandfather told me stories about places like this, rare pockets of land where the unseen world pressed too close to the surface, where rules hung so thin they could tear with a thought. Places he never let me near, places he never entered himself. But the Hollow One's footsteps grew louder behind us. We couldn't turn back. I whispered, "Sam, we can't stay here." He didn't move. He stared at the clearing like it was alive. A deep, resonant hum rose from the soil, the same mountain pulse I felt earlier, but louder. It thrummed through my knees, into my chest, into my teeth. The circle wasn't a clearing, it was a threshold, a crossroads, a place where choices were witnessed directly by the mountain. Sam nudged my hand urgently, not guiding this time, begging. I understood. We couldn't run blindly. We couldn't take just any path. We needed help, not from Mara, not from the lantern carrier, not from the ranger. We needed the one thing my grandfather trusted above everything else, the map. I tore open my backpack and pulled out the wooden box. The map lay on top. The hand-drawn, impossible map showing paths no human cartographer would ever record. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The symbols glowed faintly in the dark. I scanned until I spotted it, a symbol that matched the shape of the threshold clearing, a circle with braided roots. Next to it, written in my grandfather's handwriting, "Do not enter unless the mountains call you." I swallowed hard. "They're calling," I whispered. Sam looked at me sharply. His ears twitched, his body tensed. The forest behind us went unnaturally still. Then, a low, rumbling vibration rolled through the air. The Hollow Ones inhale, massive, cold, ready. It was close enough now that the temperature dropped sharply. Frost crackled across the ground. The darkness behind us thickened into something physical, like the forest was closing a giant hand around us. We didn't have time. I stepped into the clearing. The air shifted instantly, like I had plunged underwater, like the world muffled itself around me. Sam barked sharply behind me, but when he tried to cross the boundary, he froze mid-step. His paws hovered an inch from the soil. He couldn't come inside. His whimper was heart-shredding. "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it was. "Stay there," he growled, protesting, wanting to follow. But this place wasn't meant for him. A second later, the Hollow One stepped into view. My blood turned to ice. It stood at the edge of the clearing just a foot from Sam, taller than before, darker. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly with ember light, flickering like dying coals inside a cavern. It didn't look at Sam. It looked at me. A sound like grinding stone escaped its throat. "You have stepped where keepers stand." Its voice seemed to vibrate the trees themselves. "You cannot leave." I swallowed, my pulse thundering. "What do you want?" I forced out. The hollow one tilted its head, the movement jerky, like broken mechanics fighting gravity. "The mountain requires a choice. I'm not ready to choose." The hollow one made a low rumble, not quite laughter, but close, a sound full of deep, mocking resonance. "No keeper is ready. The choice is made by need, not desire." I shook my head. "No, not tonight. The mountains gave me time." It leaned forward, its jagged mouth splitting wider. "The mountains gave you a path, not time." My heart hammered. Its next step shook the ground. "The lantern carrier offered you shelter. You refused." Another step. "The woman by the stream offered you truth. You denied her." My breath caught. Sam snarled behind the boundary, claws digging into soil he couldn't cross. "The ranger offered you protection. You turned from him." Its hollow eyes burned brighter. "And yet," it whispered, "you still breathe." I felt something shift in the soil beneath me, a pulse, the mountain's heartbeat. The hollow one raised its head, listening. "You stand on sacred ground, ancient ground, keeper ground." The clearing began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, roots beneath the soil lighting like veins of molten gold. The braided patterns radiated outward in spirals. The hollow one hissed at the light. It stepped back, not far, not in fear, in respect. This place was older than it, older than all of them. A voice, not the hollow one's, not Mara's, not the ranger's, echoed through the clearing, a deep, resonant whisper, the mountain itself. Witness. That single word blew through me like a gust of freezing wind. The trees bowed, the soil trembled, the air thickened like the world inhaled. Then the hollow one spoke again, this time not taunting, not mocking. "Choose, Evan Mercer." My legs weakened. "Between what?" I whispered, its head tilted. "All paths." The trees shifted, revealing 3 ancient trails, one lined with silver-white stones, cold and shimmering, one marked with crimson leaves that never touched the ground, one dim, shadowed, spiraling downward. The hollow one extended one long finger toward the darkest path. "Choose, keeper, or the mountains choose for you." Behind me, Sam barked desperately, a plea, a warning, a command, and the ground beneath me began to crack, slowly, deliberately forcing me to act. The ground beneath my boots split wider, cracks glowing with molten gold light pulsing like a heartbeat. The mountain wasn't threatening me, it was demanding something. Action, decision, presence. This was the moment my grandfather had spent his life preparing for. This was the moment the factions had circled, stalked, whispered toward. Sam barked frantically from behind the boundary, claws digging deep into the soil that barred him from stepping any closer. His eyes were locked on me, wide, pleading, fiercely alive. He wanted me to choose. He needed me to. The hollow one loomed just outside the glowing circle, taller than any tree, broader than the night itself. Its hollow eyes burned with a strange kind of anticipation, like hunger mixed with awe. It lifted one long, jagged finger and pointed towards the darkest trail, the one spiraling downward into shadows so thick they swallowed the forest. "That path," it growled, "is the path of surrender, of collapse. of truth without balance. The crimson path rustled softly as if touched by unseen hands. The silver path glittered with icy light. "Choose," the Hollow One repeated, voice vibrating through my bones. The mountain's whisper echoed again, deeper this time, almost a command. "Witness." My pulse thudded painfully in my chest. I looked at each path in turn. The crimson leaf trail called to emotion, passion, power, the promise of force. Mara's trail, a path where guardianship meant intervention, protection, sacrifice in the name of stability. The silver-white stones shimmered with cold precision. Logic, structure, old agreements carefully maintained. The ranger's trail, a path of duty and oversight, of keeping peace through rules crafted over generations. The shadowed trail pulsed with something far older, entropy, collapse, erasure, the undoing of boundaries and order. The Hollow One's trail, a path not of power but of ending. And then there was the clearing itself, the threshold where I stood, the place of the witness, the one role my grandfather believed in, the path not marked by color or lure or fear, not a path you walk, a path you choose to become. Sam barked again, sharp, almost angry, and when I looked at him, something clicked. He wasn't barking at the trails, he was barking at me. Don't be pulled, don't be tempted, don't be forced. Be the one thing none of them could control. I stepped backward until my heels touched the highest point of the clearing, where the cracks formed a spiral of light beneath me. "I choose none of your paths," I said. The Hollow One hissed, drawing back like smoke hit by flame. "That is not allowed," it snarled. The crimson leaves rustled violently, the silver stones crackled with frost. But the mountain hum vibrated again. "Witness." I raised my voice stronger this time. "I choose the mountain. I choose to be the witness." The ground pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. Sam barked triumphantly at the third pulse, as if he felt something break open. The Hollow One roared, a sound that shook the clearing, shook my ribs, shook the trees. But it wasn't a victorious roar. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition and resentment and compliance. The mountain had accepted my choice. The clearing lit up in blinding gold as the braided roots beneath the soil surged with energy older than any creature present. The rings of light expanded outward, forming concentric circles that pushed everything back. The crimson wind fled into the trees. The silver frost dissolved into the air, and the Hollow One staggered away from the boundary as if struck. The mountain spoke, not in words, not in language, but in a deep vibration that felt like a verdict. Keeper. The clearing swallowed me in golden light. I wasn't lifted, I wasn't transported, I wasn't changed in a physical sense, but inside, every fear, every uncertainty, every fracture in my understanding aligned like the snapping of taut strings into harmony. Suddenly I could feel the mountains, the ridges, the rivers, the old trails, the boundaries my grandfather shaped and guarded, the tensions between factions, the balance between forces most humans never knew existed. I didn't gain power. I gained sight. The Hollow One let out a low rumble, almost respectful. Its hollow eyes dimmed. "You have chosen the center," it said, "the place without hunger, the place without thirst." Its head bowed slightly, an acknowledgement no one in my bloodline had ever received. Then it melted into the trees, vanishing as though the forest reclaimed it. The silver path faded like frost evaporating. The crimson leaves curled inward and vanished into mist. The clearing dimmed until only faint golden lines remained. Sam barked once, softly, then trotted into the circle as if allowed now that the ritual had passed. He pressed his head into my chest. I dropped to my knees and hugged him, burying my face in the warmth of his fur. For the first time since arriving, the forest didn't feel hostile. It felt aware, alert, connected. The mountains hummed once more, gentler now. Keeper. The word echoed through me like breath. I whispered into Sam's fur. Okay, I'll do it. Not because I had no choice, but because the mountains needed someone who didn't crave influence, someone who wouldn't bend the rules for the factions, someone who wouldn't seek power, a witness, a mediator, a presence. When the clearing dimmed to its normal darkness, Sam nudged me toward the path home. Not a supernatural trail, not a glowing light, just the normal forest path leading toward the broken cabin. The cabin was gone when we reached it, completely gone. Only the metal lattice remained, a silhouette of what once stood, still humming faintly with protective energy. The rest had been reclaimed by the mountain. I wasn't sad. I didn't mourn. The cabin's duty had ended the second I chose mine. Sam circled the lattice once, then sat beside it, tail thumping once as if approving the change. Morning light crept between the trees, soft and gray, illuminating the ridge in a quiet, peaceful glow. The world felt new, not safer, not simpler, just honest. I sat beside Sam, pulled out my grandfather's journal and turned to the first blank page. The mountains gave me sight. My grandfather gave me guidance. Now I had to give something back. The new rules. Rules not for fear, not for submission, but for balance. I wrote the first one slowly. 1. A keeper is not a ruler. He listens, observes, and witnesses. Sam rested his head on my knee. I kept writing. 2. All creatures may request audience. None may demand it. 3. No truth spoken through mimicry will be honored. 4. No voice born of hunger may cross the boundary. 5. Power is not traded. Only agreements. 6. Paths are neutral unless marked otherwise. 7. The mountain decides the keeper, not the factions. I paused before the last rule. One my grandfather never told me. One the mountain whispered directly into my bones. 8. The keeper never stands alone. I closed the journal. Sam pressed his head against my shoulder. Morning washed over us. The Smoky Mountains breathed in, and for the first time, they breathed out in peace. I stood up, placed my hand against Sam's warm fur, and looked across the clearing toward the tree line where old forces watched with new eyes. I'm here, I whispered. I'm ready. And the mountains answered, soft, steady, immense. Witness. Dawn eventually broke over the Smokies, washing the ridges in soft pink light, but sunlight didn't erase what happened that night. It didn't chase away the memory of the clearing or the knowledge that something ancient had looked directly into my soul and waited to see what I'd become. I walked the ridge with Sam beside me, the earth still warm from the mountain's pulse. The forest was quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the kind of stillness you feel after a long-held breath finally releases. Even the wind felt different, slipping between the pines with a soft, almost reverent whisper. I thought becoming keeper would make me feel powerful, or chosen, or burdened. But standing there, in the place my grandfather loved most, I didn't feel any of that. I felt connected, threaded into something bigger, older, wiser than I'd ever imagined. And yet, somewhere below the ridge, deep in the folds of shadow where the valleys never see full light, something moved. I didn't see it. I didn't have to. The shift in the moss, the ripple in the earth, the faint echo of a hollow breath that the wind carried with careful respect. The hollow one was still there, watching, waiting, not as an enemy, not as an ally, but as part of the balance I now swore to protect. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it grounded me. My grandfather hadn't spent his life running from the darkness. He'd spent it standing in the middle of it, witnessing, balancing, keeping the peace between forces that would tear each other and the mountains apart if left unchecked. Now it was my turn. I sat on the boulder overlooking the valley, the same one my grandfather used to read on, and opened his journal one more time. The wind flipped the pages until it rested on a blank sheet, waiting, expectant. Sam pressed his head into my side, as if urging me to write what came next, not as a rule, not as a warning, but as a promise. So I wrote a single sentence. The mountain listens after dark, and I will be here to answer. The ink glistened for a moment before drying. The page felt warm beneath my palm, like the journal itself accepted my words. A rustle behind me drew my attention. Faint footsteps, measured, deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Some presences don't require sight to be understood. Some presences make themselves known simply by the weight of the air around you. A low voice, ancient but steady, spoke from behind the ridge. Keeper. Just that one word, a greeting, acknowledgement, recognition, and then the figure, whoever, whatever it was, melted back into the trees. Sam didn't growl. He didn't bark. He merely watched them go with calm acceptance. He understood, maybe better than I did, that this was only the beginning, not of a war, not of conflict, but of duty, a lifetime of walking the boundary between the seen and unseen, a lifetime of standing where my grandfather once stood, listening to the mountains, balancing the voices, making peace with beings older than time. As the sun lifted higher, the forest around us stirred again. Birds waking, leaves shifting, branches stretching toward the morning sky. Life returning, balance restored, for now. But before I headed back down the ridge, I turned one last time toward the deep woods. A breeze moved through the pines, soft, cool, carrying a faint echo of the night before. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard a laugh, not mocking, not hungry, but patient, a reminder, a promise. Darkness still lived in these mountains. Mystery still breathed beneath the leaves. The hollow one still waited in the valley's shadow. And I was no longer afraid, because for the first time in my life, I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he said the mountains protect those who protect them. And as Sam nudged my hand, steady and warm at my side, I whispered into the morning air, "I'm here, I'm ready, let the mountains speak." And far below, carried by the wind that wound between the ridges like an old hymn, a single ancient whisper answered, "Witness."